Judges ready? All right, let's begin. I'd like to open by thanking everyone for being here. I know I always have a lot of fun when I do this sort of thing. Judge, thank you very much for taking your time out of your day to come here to be with us. Thanks to my partner as well for being a great support in this, and for the opponents for being here as well. So with that, let's move right along to the resolution. Today's resolution is the United States federal government should prohibit the exploration and development of new fossil fuel reserves. Now, let's begin with some definitions. We'd like to define should as the moral obligation or legal obligation, prohibit as to prevent, exploration and development as to utilization of any kind. Fossil fuel reserves we like to define as the oil, coal, natural gas, and the like that is in the ground, fuel that when burned creates toxic emissions for the environment. And as a weighing mechanism today, we'd like to use more good than bad, especially for the United States, as this is the United States federal government. Now moving on to plan text. Under the government's plan, the United States federal government would uphold the Paris Agreement, which says that 90% of American fossil fuel must stay in the ground and not be used. It would also prohibit the new development and exploration of these fossil fuels, and we'd use the existing legal mechanism for illegal drilling and such in order to implement and enforce this policy. Also, the United States federal government, under the government's plan, would uphold or encourage other countries to uphold the Paris Agreement and uphold their respective bans and obligations that they've made under it. Now, moving on to our advantages. Our first advantage has to do with the 2 degrees Celsius bar. Now, according to the Paris Agreement, the 2 degrees Celsius bar is a very critical bar because over 2 degrees Celsius, this is of course the level of warming. If we were to have more than 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, it would lead to catastrophic implications. Right now, we're on the pace to warm 5 degrees Celsius. If this were to happen, billions of people would be displaced. Also, it would lead to a shrinking in the amount of arable farmland in different regions, which could cause famines and even extinction of the species. Also, there are economic implications. Cities would be flooded. Trillions of dollars in cities like Miami, New York, Los Angeles, and around the world would be destroyed. Also, we'd have to spend billions of dollars in order to flood-proof cities on the coastal areas, in order to make other cities more secure from some of the severe weather that we're expecting. And these would be catastrophic implications, both for the United States and the world. By imposing this ban and encouraging other countries to do so, we would avoid these most catastrophic effects. It is our moral obligation, and it's also in our best interest to avoid these things because they would truly be catastrophic. We must side with 191 nations that have signed this agreement and do our part, uphold what we have agreed to uphold by this. Now, moving on to the second advantage. This advantage has to do with investment and development. Right now, companies need to start facing the reality that they must prepare for a future where we don't rely on fossil fuels. By taking this plan into account, by imposing the government plan and banning the new development of fossil fuels, it would force companies to face the reality that we must move into the future. According to the Paris Agreement, in 50 years, it is likely that we will run out of oil, have no more oil in the ground. It's time to start preparing now. This is not sustainable. We must face the future. Now, this would have 2 benefits. Primarily, it would help the energy sector to move along. It would force companies to start investing, instead of in new fossil fuels, investing in developing solar fuels or solar energy. In thermal energy, hydrogen energy, other renewable forces of energy, and it would have benefits in other sectors. For example, we've seen this before. In the car industry in the 1970s, when there was the oil embargo, the United States federal government imposed the first fuel mandates, fuel economy standards for the car industry. This was huge. Within a course of maybe 20 years, fuel economy in cars doubled because the United States federal government stepped in and mandated that companies had to do something as we were facing this crisis. The same thing can happen now. So not just in energy sectors, but across the board. And this would lead to 2 things. First, we would avoid the future of not having the technology we need to face this problem. We're going to run out of oil. And if we don't have the technology to face this, it would cause complete economic collapse. billions of people unemployed. It would be absolutely catastrophic for the world. It would also lead to an environmental collapse because we would have to continue relying on fossil fuels till they're exhausted. This would cause all of the environmental implications that I just talked about in the first problem. But it would also have a positive effect. It would encourage the United States to be the leader in this, to lead on this issue. It would create American jobs. This is a market we know has to exist eventually. The United States would be at the front of it and reap the economic benefits. Now moving on to the third advantage, this has to do with public safety. It's the first duty of any government to protect its citizens. Now new technologies that the United States companies are utilizing within the United States to create new fossil fuel resources are having really terrible effects on the population. Look at Oklahoma. Oklahoma has now more earthquakes than California because of fracking. There are people concerned about cancer. Scientists warning that by injecting all of these chemicals into the ground to get oil out, we're going to poison ourselves 30, 40 years down the road. Also, look at the BP oil disaster. Of course, we're drilling now in the Gulf of Mexico and other places deeper than ever before, using risky new technologies that clearly have blown up in our face at least once before. So by adopting the government plan, we would avoid this and make America safer not only in the future, but today. Also, our last advantage has to do with hegemony. The United States is the largest economy, it's the largest consumer of these fossil fuels. We have to face the fact that if anything is going to get done, it has to be the United States federal government, it has to be the United States that takes the lead on this issue. It's just a fact. Because we're the largest, we have to step up and be that. We have to be there to avoid the 5 degrees Celsius path that we're going on, save all those implications to the environment. We have to be there because we want to invest in the future, be prepared for a day when we can't rely on fossil fuels any longer, and be there in front of the pack, leading the way economically, and also to benefit our citizens in safety today and the world as we be a leader. And for these reasons, we urge a government ballot on this issue. All right, thank you.